Tensions growing between the U.S. and Tehran after Iranian-backed militants tried to storm the American embassy in Baghdad, the attack ending when the militia left the scene after just 2 days. The Trump administration responding by sending hundreds of troops to the area, but media coverage of what happened is getting major backlash. Some outlets slamming the president and even trying to label the incident as Trump's Benghazi. Here's a look at some of the coverage.
You've got them, stoking anti-Americanism, potentially giving an advantage to Iran.
This goes back to a really strategic decision that the president made.
We're engaged in a war of words, which is certainly not helpful.
These are tough times, and one worries whether the administration has the sort of horsepower and brain power to deal with them.
And MSNBC's Joy Reid piling on with this tweet calling the embassy attack Trump's Benghazi. And other outlets like the Washington Post under fire for labeling the Iranian-backed militants as just protesters. The New York Times is also facing similar criticism for describing the attackers as mourners. A former Benghazi team member is blasting the Benghazi comparisons.
It's not really similar at all. It wasn't another Benghazi. It's not Trump's Benghazi. And to me, it wasn't even close to Benghazi. I kind of laughed when somebody said, oh, this is Trump's Benghazi. No, it's not, because all the non-essential personnel were evacuated. There was no ambassador there to be killed like they'd left the ambassador in Benghazi.
Lawrence, there wouldn't be comparisons to Benghazi if there wasn't a Benghazi.
Right.
And it really is not comparable.
At all. And Tig said it well, but Tanta also says there's a difference between a riot, he was also there, and a coordinated attack. And the response was also different. There were no lives lost. The fact is that President Trump immediately and the Defense Department, the Secretary of State, all stepped in and made sure that there were people there. Marines are already there. People are being shifted, and nobody died. I just think this shows you how far the media is willing to go to give cover to Democrats. And you think when it comes to national security, foreign policy, although we may have some differences, when it comes to attack, we should be unified on it. And the fact that they are carrying the water of the Democratic Party is pretty shameful.
Marie, you know probably more about this attack than anybody here. So what do you think about attempts to compare this? I mean, one of the things that happened in Benghazi was a video maker got arrested, and basically they did a perp walk of him, saying that the video sparked the attack, when now, of course, we know that wasn't true.
They're very different situations. The compound in Baghdad is incredibly well fortified. It's very well protected. Obviously, the Benghazi outpost was in the front lines of an ongoing civil war. An actual better comparison to Benghazi, I think, it was the attack in Niger early in the Trump administration, where 4 American service members were killed in a very botched operation. I don't think the comparison is good here. Some of the people we played, though, in those clips weren't talking about Benghazi. They were talking about what President Trump's strategy is vis-a-vis Iran, and whether he has one, quite frankly. And I think my concerns here aren't about some Benghazi comparison. It's about the fact that much of what the Trump administration has done has emboldened the hardliners in Iran. The IRGC today feels like they can encourage their militias in places like Iraq and Syria to do this, and we have to figure out how we're going to respond. You know, the Israelis have taken a lot of kinetic action against Shiite militias backed by Iran in places like Iraq and Syria, but they do it much more quietly because they're trying to send a message but not provoke some of the outrage that you've seen on the ground, which unfortunately can put our people in harm's way. Thankfully, we've evacuated the embassy, but a result of that is that we don't have people on the ground doing American diplomacy as many as we should.
Marines that are there to help protect them.
Security,
but one of the reasons that Iran has been able to train up all of these other militias is because they got a lot of money during the Obama administration.
Pal, it's full of it.
JCPOA.
But what difference at this point does it make?
Call back. That's a callback right there.
The thing is that I want to shame the media on this because, those headlines from the outlets like the Washington Post, the New York Times, they have to differentiate between, there are protests in Iraq since October, real protests. And this is what you see on social media. You see people, on Twitter saying, I'm one of the real protesters. I've been protesting this government because they are very angry in Iraq about, they want reforms.
Iranian influence.
Yes. And so Iranians have come in and piggybacked on those protests. And the media needs to differentiate, and they're not doing their job and saying that they're very different things.
The administration has done that. We also have some sound here from President Trump. I'm like, Emily. I don't know. I looked up and I was like, I'm going to remember your name. Because, you know, I don't even know what day of the week it is, actually. If you've been working this during the holidays and you're like me, you're like, is it Friday? Is it Monday? I have really no idea. Emily, take a listen to President Trump, who he obviously knows what day it is. Watch.
The Marines came in. We had some Greek warriors come in and do a fantastic job. And they were there instantaneously as soon as we heard. I use the word immediately. They came immediately, and it's in great shape. As you know, this will not be a Benghazi. Benghazi should never have happened. This will never, ever be a Benghazi.
Look, it's not a comparable comparison on any level. We have made drastic efforts not to provoke Iranian-backed militias as we've been fighting ISIS this entire time. And the bottom line is that their continued aggression against bases could not be tolerated. So I agree with you that there's a bit of nebulousness in strategy in the past couple years. But the bottom line is we've taken that hardline stance with a very articulable position that will serve us well in the long term. And I think that, you know, the Iraqi government, obviously, they're in a difficult position. But regardless, they need to take a stance. They need to protect our embassy. And, you know, to your point about the media, you know, their headline today, not to jump issues, but about the Uyghur murder right now in China, they said, as it detains parents, China weans children from Islam. So we are no stranger. They are no stranger to the fact that all of their headlines are absolutely ludicrous. In these times of what we deserve would be political specificity. And final point, my friend actually headed out to Baghdad today on behalf of the U.S. government. He said as he was checking in, he flew commercial, and the woman who checked him in at the airline counter was like, Baghdad, like, are you aware of what's going on right now? And he goes, more than the average bear.
Yeah, I like he's pretty well aware.
The New York Times also referred to these terrorists, protesters, whatever you want to call them, as mourners.
Yes.
What were they mourning?
So some of them
the fact that they got attacked.
Yeah.
Hezbollah was attacked. You're mourning that?
I mean, yes, they were. That doesn't mean we should have sympathy for them. But, I mean, to Tom's point, I think it was a really smart point that the people on the ground who are protesting, who are outside our embassy, are a bunch of different people. Some are mourners, some are protesters,
but they're
some are
mourning bad guys being killed, right?
Yes,
they're bad guys,
but the other, you know, yes, they're bad guys. The Iraqis, as Emily said, are in a tough position because they want this place to be safe. They want our embassy to be safe. They also see these airstrikes at some level as an imposition on their sovereignty. And so they're trying to play this game where they're trying not to allow, you know, people to come onto their airspace and to do these things, but they also don't like these Iranian-backed militias. They're trying to play this middle space here, and that's really hard for the Iraqis, a government we want to be strong going forward.
I just think that comparisons to Benghazi that early, the types of comparisons that we saw that would like jump the gun makes me think that they never really understood what happened in Benghazi in the first place. There's a great movie about that called 13 Hours. Catch it over the weekend because it's only Thursday.